Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on what I find the most intriguing topic in my job. And of course, that's because once upon a time, I thought I could be an economist like our special guest today, Jeff Borland, who is not just an economist, but the Redmond Barry Professor of Economics at the University of Melbourne. Special, recognition for anybody who can place into the chat what was Redmond Barry primarily known for. I'll give you a bit of a tip. He was a judge and he did some big things in the 1880s. So I'm going to look forward to Jeff giving us some insight as to what the connection is between his infamous, I'll describe it as past, and economics and the labour market of 2025. So thank you very much for joining us, Jeff. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Delighted to join or bring in Mike Kenny as well. So Mike is Business Development Manager with ScottPack and works very closely with RCSA on our recruitment finance solutions. And without our partners like ScottPack, we are a shadow of ourselves. I'll be having a little bit of a chat with Mike towards the end of today's webinar around what is he seeing in markets and maybe some of his reflections on Jeff's insights as well. Just recognising that we are coming to you today on Wiradjuri land, and like to pay our respects to elders past and present. Again, reminding everybody of how proud I am of all the work we do with First Nations people across Australia in allowing them to balance their cultural, family, sporting and other needs, balancing those with doing good work in Australia as well. So I'm really excited about today's conversation because I feel that we, as true leaders in the world of work, recruitment, staffing and workforce solutions, it's absolutely critical that we can bring to conversations with clients and to some extent candidates insights and knowledge that they wouldn't necessarily have access to or wouldn't necessarily ordinarily read. So speaking of reading, I love reading Jeff's material. Jeff will regularly put out a range of different newsletters on different topics of what's changing in the labour market. And I'd encourage you to do the same. But ultimately, today's purpose is to look at a range of different things, which is what's going on in the labour market. Why is it soft for most recruitment and staffing firms, but at the same time, it's a really tight labour market, okay? What's happening in the world of job mobility? You know, how is it that the government can be on one hand promoting the great contribution of job mobility to productivity and therefore living standards, but on the other hand trying to demonize, you know, insecure work and otherwise? And what does job mobility actually mean? What does it mean for the changing world of work, different demographics? And then we'll be looking at what does that actually mean for your business from a strategy formulation point of view? Where are potentially the future opportunities for recruitment and staffing firms? If you, like me, are sitting there and going, well, this AI thing, that's part of it, but equally the way in which people choose to live and work is changing as well. So I know, Jeff, that the University of Melbourne, where of course you reside academically, does a lot of great work on this, and we've had great conversations previously with Mark Wooden, who I know was the father of the HILDA, Household Income Labour Dynamics of Australia survey, which I think is the longest longitudinal study of how Australians live and work. So I'm sure there'll be a little bit of digging into that as well. Reminding everybody that we will be recording today's webinar and we will be actually taking some AI notes so that we can prepare it and summarise it and send it back to you in terms of what are some of the key takeouts for you, understanding what's going on in the labour market and how you can use that in your recruitment and staffing firm. I would absolutely love it if there were contributions. So there are some audio issues. Carly, I just wonder if there is an issue that we need to direct. I'm going to turn my mic off and on at the direction of Carly, so just bear with me for... Is that any better? Can you hear me more clearly now, Carly? Otherwise, I might need to log out and log back in. No, not better. Okay.
Charles, it's just a little bit like distorted.
Okay, that is odd. It's never happened before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial out and I'm going to dial back in. So bear with me. Always love doing this on the run. In the meantime, Mike and Jeff are going to sing a duet. Thank you, guys. I'll be back in 1 minute.
And Jeff, do you want to kick us off with the duet?
Well, the duet. Yeah, yeah. What's your favourite song?
What's my favorite song? It's last on my Spotify, I wonder.
I don't know any songs about economics or anything, so
Okay.
No.
Is that any better? I'm hoping that it is.
it is, Charles.
Hey, look at that. The old Fonzie trick. If anyone's as old as me and you remember watching Happy Days, he'd just kick the jukebox and everything would be back in order. So here we are. I'm sure, Jeff, you are a lover of Happy Days. So on that note of Happy Days, I wonder, there are many of our members, of course, that and those outside of our membership that think we should be having happy days. And the reality is that we see that unemployment is really low. We still hear about a lot of skill shortages, but the simple reality is that our market has never been as soft. As one of our luminaries said to me only about 9 months ago, he's been in the industry for over 50 years and he's never seen it this bad. So my kickoff question is around the paradox of a so-called, I guess, tight labour market, but a soft recruitment and staffing market. So my first question over to you, Jeff, to kick things off is, we are experiencing a paradox. Unemployment is historically low, yet private sector recruitment and staffing market has softened considerably since 2022. What's going on? What's your analysis of the disconnect, mate?
Yeah, so I think there's two sort of answers to that, Charles. One answer is that it is true that the rate of unemployment is still at historic low levels. If you compare, back to the 2010s or earlier when we tended to have rate of unemployment above 5%. But on the other hand, the rate of unemployment has actually increased in the last year or 18 months from up to 3.5% up to 4.5%. So the overall picture is of a weakening labour market, even though if you look at kind of the absolute level of the rate of unemployment, you think, well, look, that looks okay historically. But in fact, for the last 18 months or a bit more now, we've been in weakening labour market. I mean, to give you one perspective on that, in 2024, net jobs increased by 350,000 or so. In the first 6 months of this year, it was only 44,000. So in the labour market as a whole, it's definitely weakening. Then add to that the fact that most of the growth has actually been in the public sector. So you've got a general weakening, and what growth has been in the public sector largely. And so yeah, it's not at all surprising that your members would be seeing a weak private sector labour market. I mean, like in 2024, public sector employment grew by about 6%, but private sector 2%. This year, lower for both of them. Public sector about 3%, private sector down about 1.5%. So I think it's not at all surprising your members would be feeling that way. The disconnect's explained by the fact that, look, even though unemployment by historic levels is, sort of looks okay, it's actually increased. There's a weakening labour market in the last 18 months, and all the data show that that's especially the case in the private sector.
Do you see this changing a great deal into the future, Jeff? I mean, you've mentioned that we are seeing some, changes already. But I mean, one of the things that we're grappling with as an industry is that there is, of course, under the current Commonwealth government, a focus on so-called secure jobs, and they are looking to utilise third-party intermediaries, recruitment and staffing firms less, and employ people directly and on so-called good jobs, full-time and direct. I mean, are you seeing that that is actually starting to have an impact upon how people are being employed as well?
Well, yeah, to the extent that that's the case, then I guess that then becomes a third factor that you add in, that the type of private sector jobs that your members are looking to hire for are, are maybe increasing at an even slower rate. And it's one sort of interesting thing though, which maybe goes against what you're saying, the ABS have a survey called the Characteristics of Employment Survey, where for the last decade or so they've been asking people who are employed whether they found their job through a recruitment or a labour hire firm, and 2014 to 2022, about 600,000 people said that that was how they found their job. It was pretty constant. Actually, 2024, it blipped up to about 750,000. So that now that's a very aggregate sort of number and doesn't necessarily reflect exactly the type of jobs that your members are recruiting for. But yeah, that was kind of interesting to me that after a period of steadiness, sort of in that 2022, 2024 period, there had been that increase. Of course, 2024, is now the time that survey's done, is sort of like about a year, a bit 15 months ago, sort of. And so it may be that what we saw 2022 to 2024 was the benefits of sort of that strong growth in employment, benefiting sort of, I guess, lifting all sort of boats. But that, then it'll be interesting to see the 2026 survey, because I guess if what you're saying your members are experiencing, we might see that number drop back down again. But yeah, if what you're saying is the case, then I guess that becomes a third factor in addition to the two factors I mentioned, why things look so sort of things don't look strong sort of in the for the type of workers who your members are placing.
Yeah, and when we talk about government jobs, because I think we've heard a lot about it within the industry, that that there's a lot of government jobs, and that's been soaking up a lot of the excess labour. Are we talking about government? Or are we talking about government-funded jobs, and what's the difference?
Yeah. So I mean, we have these two categories like private and public, which is, I guess, everyone would understand that public is actually if you're working for a local government or state government or Commonwealth government or agency or whatever. Private sector is if you're working for private business. And that was the numbers I was talking about before in reference to your question about private. But yeah, we have this other way of thinking about the labour market, which the ABS calls sort of a non-market versus market. And non-market consists of three industries: uh, public administration and safety, education and training, and healthcare and social assistance. And so of course, not all jobs in those three industries are public sector. Like there's lots of healthcare jobs, for example. You've got private medical practitioners and so on. But what is important about those categories is that, and the reason the ABS pulls out that non-market group is they tend to be government funded jobs, very dependent on health sector. You might be working in private practice, but it's important depending on sort of how much funding the government's putting into Medicare and so on, or into hospitals and so on. And yeah, there you've kind of seen a similar story really to the public private, even though they're not exactly the same. That all of the growth, really going back to sort of like late sort of 2021 has been in the non-market sector. It's amazing the extent to which employment growth in the last sort of 3 or 4 years has really been concentrated, not exclusively, sort of, I don't want to overstate it, but yeah, historically sort of very different to previously. Huge growth in sort of healthcare social assistance in particular, which is reflecting things like the NDIS and increased funding for aged care and so on. Also, to some extent, sort of education and training. And so, yeah, that's really been sort of the engine of the growth in the economy, which means that there's, and that there has been less growth in the market industries, which are, you can run through all of them. There's 15, so I won't say them all, but we're talking about agriculture, mining, manufacturing, construction, wholesale trade, retail trade, et cetera, sort of. So, yeah, there's been this real bifurcation in employment growth in the last few years, which may be some, it appears to be from what you're saying that it's something your members are feeling.
Okay. I'm going to bring you in a moment, Mike, to get a perspective from you on what you're seeing in terms of the industries that are growing and those that aren't, because, obviously you guys fund a lot of growth. But before I do that, Jeff, I'm always intrigued. I know we actually had net migration growth to the point where I think it was close to us at 500,000, net new migrants into Australia, and possibly that, of course, well, I know it would contribute to labour market supply as well. Do you have any sort of understanding as to whether the government jobs were soaking up that additional number of migrants into the economy as well, or is that not something that you monitor?
Well, I think so with migration, it's important to sort of say that, of course, we had the big decrease in migration to start off with, when COVID hit 2020, 2021, until we reopened international borders. And then, of course, we had a big surge in migration when borders reopened, especially sort of the temporary visa holders. In fact, like it was only really in about late 2024 that population in Australia sort of caught up to the 5-year trajectory from before COVID. So I guess we kind of when we looked at that 500,000 number, which was amazing, sort of, but we kind of forget sometimes there was that decrease before, and so the net effect on kind of the labour market, when you look over the sort of 4-year period, wasn't that great in terms of a total supply of workers, and because the surge was a lot in sort of international students, and they weren't really um, in the type of jobs that are being created by the government. I think to the extent that I think what we have observed is some extra flow of workers from what economists call out of the labour force, which means that they people who weren't sort of necessarily actively searching for work or saying they were ready to start a job when the ABS asked, "What are you doing at the moment in terms of work?" and that, but who it seems like the opportunity to work in particular care sector jobs has meant that they've thought, "Oh, okay, um, you know, um, here's a job that I could do, and I'm going to try and take up that employment opportunity, sort of." So I think those government jobs, like the other thing, there's obviously been a boost in sort of within the size of the public sector, sort of that I guess is a lot of more uh, well, also, I guess, to some extent that's graduates moving into the departments and agencies, but also, I guess it's people, moving into service type jobs, working for Services Australia. And again, I don't think that's been the immigrants doing those jobs. It's been, this kind of workers who are drawn from probably out of the labour force, seeing this new opportunity to work in a service type job that sort of maybe has part-time sort of conditions, and that flexible sort of conditions are moving into those type of jobs.
Yeah, interesting. So, Mike, does this sort of align with where you see the money going and the investment going and the growth going? And if you sort of identify a few industry sectors where you do see it continuing to grow, that our members could be looking to pivot to or to continue to grow into, what would they be?
Yeah, so we have somewhere in the region of about 5.5 clients in total, and specifically around about 400 in the recruitment sector. But overall, over the last year, we've seen a large uptick in clients in the construction, transport, and warehousing industries, and we've seen a modest increase in manufacturing and wholesale trade. And that's just obviously the clients that are coming to us for finance. But from an overall recruitment market perspective, we do believe that agencies should look to focus on clean energy renewable sectors, specialising in sort of those green skills staffing due to the major projects available through the governments. The technology sector also seems to be largely under-resourced for software developers, cloud engineers, cybersecurity professionals, and they typically come with a higher margin for those specialised recruitment, so it could be quite fruitful. And then finally, in terms of actual states, WA and Queensland have showed significant growth in the regional areas of their states due to the large infrastructure projects expected there or already underway.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. I'm going to shift, Jeff, now to the issue of labour supply and participation. I'm really interested in the way in which we're changing and the way in which we live and work. I mentioned the Hilda studies previously. I'm sure that gives some insights. But how is the modern Australian worker redefining their relationship with work, and what are the long-term implications for labour supply from your perspective?
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess over different periods of time, sort of there's a whole set of sort of drivers that have changed, that are changing or have changed the way we work. I mean, there are the obvious ones, sort of, which now extends over virtually 60 years. The growth of part-time work. I mean, if you go back to the late 70s, about 15% of people were working part-time. That's up to about 31% now, and that's been sort of a gradual evolution. Probably, driven by a combination of people who are moving into the workforce looking for part-time jobs, and the growth of sort of service type industries which are more amenable to people working part-time than the kind of focus on sort of, for example, manufacturing and so on, some other industries from 50 or 60 years ago. I mean, another big one is people delaying retirement. I mean, yeah, I can remember sort of when I was first kind of a student, the big thing was the fact that older males who were being sort of badly affected by the decline of manufacturing in the 70s and early 80s were retiring earlier. But sort of in the 90s, that kind of really started to turn around with the change in the types of jobs that are being done, sort of more amenable to working longer. People starting to realize that they were living longer, and I guess adjusting sort of their perspective on what a good time to retire would be in order to sort of balance work versus time out of the labour market. It is pretty amazing. Like the ABS figures say that um, in um, in 2000, the average age at retirement was 53. Now it's 63.8 years. Important part of that is females working longer, especially. That females, it was relatively usual 20 years ago to be um, leaving the labour market in 50s or something, but now we're finding females working longer, males to some extent now working longer as well. And yeah, so we've had this 10-year increase in the average age of retirement in just sort of 25 years. Yeah, obviously there's other things you can talk about. Female spending sort of less time out of work on childbirth, or sort of not exiting the labour market sort of on childbirth. That really comes up sort of in the data when you look at, if you track sort of employment rates of females by age, sort of. You used to get this big dip in the sort of 25 to 34 age group, but we don't see that anymore. If you fast forward to the present, of course, we've got working from home. If you look at sort of the data on the ABS or Hilda data, when COVID hit, we saw about a 20 percentage point increase in the proportion of people saying they were doing any kind of working, say, at least a day at home. About half of that seems to have stuck. And you'd have to think now that that's kind of sort of locked in. So, so I mean, there's kind of these long, slow drivers like the part-time work kind of, which evolves with the structure of the economy, the retirement sort of thing as well. And then there are these sort of shorter term things that come along like COVID that sort of shock us into new ways of working as well. So yeah, there's a whole variety of sort of drivers of sort of what happens to the way we work. And I guess if you're going to forecast, well, what does that mean for labour supply? Yeah, it's really about sort of judging, well, okay, Do we think this evolution of part-time work is going to continue? Do we think the industry structure is going to keep changing in that way? Do we think people are going to keep sort of life expectancy, keep increasing, keep adjusting sort of their, that's kind of, I guess, the way I'd think about what's going to happen to labour supply as well. What are the drivers, or what have been the drivers? To what extent do we think they're going to continue? Sort of how powerful will they be?
Yeah, interesting. Um, so when we think about jobs being filled, that can be done by workers in existing jobs, or it can be new workers. You've spoken about people coming out of, or I guess participating more and maybe working further into their retirement. Where do those new workers come from primarily?
So yeah, on average, about the ABS has data called flows data, which tell you sort of like month to month, um, people who moved into employment from either unemployment or from out of the labour force. And on average, usually about a third of people who take up jobs who weren't already employed come from unemployment, and about two-thirds come from out of the labour force. That is, which surprises some people, because people think, well, but it's the unemployed who they're the ones who are looking for work, sort of. But yeah, we have this idea of some workers who we sometimes call marginally attached to the labour force. That when the ABS goes and asks them 1 month, oh, are you actively looking for work? They'll say no. But next month, when the ABS comes along, they say, you're working. They say, yeah, we are. And then you say, well, how is it? They weren't looking a month ago, and now they're. And it's big, it's this idea that, look, there are people who they're not actively looking, but if they see an opportunity, sort of, they are actually interested in moving into work. Or it could be people who weren't looking for some other reason, that they're waiting for kids to get to school age or something, and then they're going to move in, sort of. And but it's kind of a striking fact that it's the people who move into jobs who weren't already in jobs. Actually, the largest proportion of them, sort of, the ABS doesn't count them as being unemployed. And what you find is that when the labour market gets tighter, and we saw this sort of in the recent period of time, the proportion of people coming into jobs who are unemployed actually decreases a bit, and the proportion who are out of the labour force increases. Whether you're kind of hitting some limit in terms of the people who are job ready who are unemployed, and so then you kind of want to draw more from out of the labour force, or in the most recent episode, it could also be that, look, the employment expansion was in a very particular type of job, service sector type jobs in the government and that. And yeah, that may have been particularly attractive to people who are sort of like thinking, yeah, I wouldn't mind working. I'm not going to actively search, but look, if something comes along, I'll move into, I'll certainly apply.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I've heard a lot of our members talk about what I'd call middle management that have either been retrenched or they've left, and they're finding it really difficult to get back into work, but they're not necessarily formally looking for work. So I do feel there might be a higher true unemployment rate. Would that be fair?
Yeah, yeah. So there's always, I guess it's one of the sort of arcane things that labour economists debate about, like what should the measure of unemployment be? And so the International Labour Organization has this definition that you're unemployed if you actively searched for work in the sort of last 4 weeks, and if you are ready to start a job. But but yeah, if you think no, 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 look, I actually think unemployment is people who want to work, regardless of sort of whether they're actually looking, yeah, then, there's strong arguments to look, actually, our measures should include, for example, people who are sort of the ABS would count as marginally attached, that they want to work, but they're just not actively looking because they can't see the opportunity, sort of. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, there's the definitions we have of things like unemployment. They're often driven by statistical agencies, and there's a sense to them, but you always want to kind of, if you're trying to use one of those measures, you want to check it against your sense of what it is you actually think it is that you want to capture.
Yeah. So when we talk about that participation, what's the current evidence of sensitivity of participation on external factors like mortgage stress and cost of living? Are they the factors that are pushing people to participate more and soaking up maybe some of that excess capacity?
Yeah. So that's a really interesting question. Um, because yeah, I guess I said before about, well, these jobs that are available maybe inducing people who are out of labour force to move into them. But then you think, well, okay, is it just that the job was available, or is there some other external driver? So we don't know a lot about that in Australia. There's one study which has been done by a group including an economist at the Reserve Bank, Jonathan Hamber. What they did was they looked at households organized according to data on the extent to which they were facing mortgage stress. So, there's a data set, well, the Hilda data set, which you mentioned before, Charles. You can use that data set to classify households on the basis of their mortgage repayments as a percentage of income, sort of. And so what they did is they organized the households into five groups, from the group who were sort of least mortgage stressed to the most mortgage stressed. And then they looked at what happened to the labour supply of those households when the Reserve Bank started increasing interest rates in 2021, 2022. And it's quite interesting. What they found is that, for example, if you're in a household in the group who weren't really, well, least mortgage stress, no change in labour supply in your household when the Reserve Bank started increasing interest rates. But if you're a household who are in the fifth of the households, the bottom, or the fifth of the households who are experiencing most mortgage stress, when the Reserve Bank started increasing interest rates, then you did actually find two things. First of all, the likelihood of a member of the household who wasn't in employment moving into part-time work increased. And secondly, people who are already working part-time, their hours of work increased as well. So yeah, quite strong evidence sort of households who are experiencing sort of mortgage stress, or most likely to experience mortgage stress, reacting to the RBA increasing interest rates. We don't know so much about the effect of price inflation, just the general effect of that on, look, it's more expensive to buy the groceries, pay the energy bills and that. But yeah, anecdotally, I guess there's evidence as well of that sort of driving households where those price increases represented a greater source of stress to supply extra labour.
Right. Well, one of the things our members have commented on is that they feel that people are not moving in their jobs as much. So job mobility has decreased. And as a result of that, there are less vacant positions to fill, which has then led to slower business for many recruitment and staffing firms. Um, this term job hugging is something that I'm hearing a lot more. Is job hugging where you sort of continue to hug your existing job and don't move? Is that a real thing, or is it just a feeling we
Um, well, I mean, yeah, I'm not aware of sort of any um, I mean, so I understand what you're saying, the idea that, look, for reasons of security, there might be periods of time when you're less likely to kind of want to risk moving jobs. I'm not sort of aware of evidence on the extent to which that's kind of driving what's happening at the moment. I think the big point to make about well, there's a couple of points to make about job mobility. One thing is, in Australia, job mobility has been in a long-term decline since about the mid 1970s. Ever since the ABS started collecting data on job mobility, the proportion of people who move jobs in the last 12 months, which is the data the ABS collects, has been declining.
declining
Has been
really since the 70s? That
Yeah, been
surprises me.
declining since the 70s. About a fifth of that can be explained by the fact that the population's getting older, sort of, and older people are less likely to work. Maybe, for example, your point about job hugging is, you get older, you're more worried about sort of, moving, or you're more used to your current job or whatever. About a fifth of the decline is explained by the older population, but about four-fifths isn't. It seems to be mainly concentrated amongst younger workers. And and I don't think as yet we have sort of like a really strong understanding of why that is. There are suggestions that, well, it's because there's less. We know that there's less entry of new firms these days in Australia as there are in other countries, and that new firms are always, obviously you've got a new firm, you've got to hire people sort of, and so that becomes a source of labor mobility. There's also some discussion about the extent to which sort of, things like occupational licensing and that, if they've changed over time, the extent to which that might be sort of have caused a reduction in mobility. But yeah, I don't think we still sort of haven't arrived at a satisfactory explanation for that. But yeah, um, definitely sort of levels of mobility at the moment are low by historical standards. I mean, what happened in the last sort of 4 or 5 years is when COVID came, of course, in 2020, no one could move. No one was moving jobs because there weren't new jobs being advertised and that and so on. Then sort of after COVID, we had a bit of a surge, which I think is mainly explained by catch up. That in 2021 there was quite a bit of job mobility, but then it's actually come back down sort of in the last couple of years, back to the level that it was at before. So yeah,
Okay.
job mobility is at sort of relatively low levels, and you're exactly right. I guess the extent to which mobility is lower, that means that vacancies aren't being created.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that rolls into the future. Um, I know that the RBA recently, in its recent decision, I think Tuesday of last week, relied upon two key things not to move rates. One of them was obviously a bit of concern about CPI peaking up again. The other one was reliance upon this notion of quit rates, job quit rates. My understanding that, Jeff, is that when they see an increase of the number of employees quitting their job, i.e., moving, i.e., higher mobility, that says that the labour market is actually tightening. Is that right? And therefore, people are seeing greater opportunity because they can get a higher wage somewhere else. And as a result of when we see a tightening of the labour market, that's of concern to the RBA because it will contribute to potentially higher wage and salary, and that's a worry. Can you just
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the
explain?
RBA, there's this idea of sort of a balance between demand and supply in the labor market, and the idea of a tight labor market is when demand's moving closer to the available supply, sort of, and so therefore employers. When the level of labor demand's closer to the available supply, employers have got to compete harder to get workers to come to their firm, and then the RBA see that as causing an increase in wages, which then they worry is going to contribute to an increase in price inflation. So that's exactly the logic. And it is true historically that the quit rate, the rate at which workers quit their jobs, is varies kind of positively with the business cycle. So when labor markets are strong, you tend to get a higher quit rate. When the labour market's weaker, you tend to get a lower quit rate. I'm not convinced, sort of, though, having looked at sort of the quit data the RBA are using, that well, at least I think it's too early to sort of to call um, that as a permanent sort of increase in the quit rate, or the start of a long run trend to sort of a big increase in the quit rate. If you look at sort of the graph they show, which shows data going back to sort of like the late 2000s from memory, the quit rate, there have been some periods when it's really sort of jumped up and gone back down, like in the 2000s during the mining boom, strong market, the quit rate really went up. Then when things weakened, came back down. In COVID, the quit rate sort of drops, then bounces back up and that. But actually, the amount that it's changed in the last 2 quarters, which the RBA are pointing at, is, in the 2010s, it was bouncing around by the same amount, like quarter to quarter, and there was never a long run, it didn't create any long run trend. So, I mean, right at the start, we were talking about the weak labor market, and I think I think you've got all these other indicators of the labour market being relatively weak. Um, I think it's difficult to sort of interpret sort of 2 quarters of data on an increased quit rate. I mean, I think it'll take us a little bit longer. You know, if it's still happening after 2 more quarters and we've got this year-long trend increase in the quit rate, yeah, then we should really start to think about, okay, what's happening? And especially if the other indicators are weak, then it's like, wow, the quit rate's moving in an opposite direction. What's happening in the labour market? But at the moment, I kind of feel like, to me, sort of that isn't strong enough evidence to
Yeah, got it.
yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's an interesting one because I would think that our members would feel that a higher quit rate is good on one hand because it means that the market is becoming tighter, people are moving, there's more, vacant jobs to fill and more investment. On the other hand, of course, it probably means that your interest rates on your mortgage are going to go up. So it's a bit of a love-hate relationship with quit rates,
Exactly.
I would imagine. I'm going to turn my attention now to staffing firms capitalising on structural and industry nuances. So this is all about if we're sitting here in a recruitment and staffing firm.
Sorry,
I've gone
Charles.
robotic again. I'm going to jump out and jump back in. So I apologise once again. Okay, is that better again? I'm
Yep,
hoping.
better.
Yep. Yep.
Looks like my Zoom microphone quit rate has gone up. We'll come back to that later on and analyse what that means for interest rates and our strategy. So the next thing I want to take a look at is how do our members, how do the firms capitalise on the structural and industry nuances that we're talking about? So Jeff, based on your aggregate level forecasting, specifically the impact of RBA policy, i.e. interest rates, government workplace relations policy, consumer behaviour, etc., where are the largest opportunities for recruitment firms likely to exist across industries and occupations, in your opinion?
So yeah, I mean, I think the bad news is that as long as the RBA kind of keeps its approach of sort of fighting inflation first and keeps interest rates high, that um, and to the extent that the federal government sort of are increasingly worried about budget deficit and that it's difficult to see sort of the labour market going back to the conditions of 2021, 2022 with strong growth and that. I think overall, yeah, it's likely to be sort of for the next 12 months still a slower sort of labour market.
Could I just jump in there? Do you see, because I think we all accept in the recruitment and staffing industry that 21, 22, early 23 was an anomaly.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
likelihood of getting back there is low. But I think we're all pretty comfortable with what it was like in 2018, 19 leading up to COVID. Do you potentially see it getting back to that level?
Well,
We won't hold you to it.
I
Your
think
best guess.
well, I think at the moment, sort of things are probably a little bit sort of weaker than they were, back then. And I guess what I'm saying is that, yeah, it's a good point, Charles, that yeah, a comparative of what happened 21 to 23 is sort of an exceptional, comparing against an exceptional period. Yeah, I think what I'm saying is that even kind of judged against the norm of sort of the years before COVID, things perhaps for the next year or so, sort of are looking, it's difficult to sort of see a jump up from where they are at the moment, which is sort of relatively, weak conditions. Having said that, I mean, yeah, there are, you question about sort of industries and where the growth is really sort of pertinent. Um, and I mean, yeah, the forecast you make kind of always depend on the time period over which you're sort of looking and that. But yeah, I did a couple of things sort of. I looked at industries and just looked at sort of 2 year and 10 year sort of growth rates and in employment, and then looked at the industries where the vacancy levels sort of are relatively high at the moment and have been high. And I think this is kind of in a very broad sense consistent with what Mike was saying, that the two big industries that really stick out are professional, scientific, and technical services, and healthcare and social assistance still sort of. Those are the industries where sort of you've seen both in the last couple of years, but also over the last decade, relatively strong rates of growth. And because they're large industries, they're also industries where they have large volume of vacancies, and that they might have the same vacancy rate as a smaller industry, but because they're big employers, they have relatively high numbers of vacancies at any point in time. Mining actually has the highest vacancy rate. It's 4.5% still, which is really high. But of course, mining is a relatively small employer, and so it only has, in absolute numbers, about a quarter of the vacancies of those other groups. Yeah, I also looked at the data on the ABS data on the I think what you refer to as the on-hire workers, and yeah, they're and yeah, I mean, just one thing to say is that if your members are sort of interested in kind of knowing what's happening in that sector, there is this. All you got to do is, it might not be the term you use, but if you type in ABS labour hire, it'll take you to sort of their data on that, which is actually has this information about the proportion, it has how many workers were hired or say they were hired through labour hire or recruitment sort of business. And I mean, yeah, this may be telling you what I know already, but yeah, it's interesting that the really big occupations, professions, about 170,000, clerical administrative, 125,000, and the machinery operator labourer category, about 190,000. The occupation where there's been the most growth in the last couple of years is professionals, but also actually community and personal services. So it
Sounds like
isn't
that non-market stuff coming back.
exactly. It isn't a big absolute because it starts from a really low base, but actually the size of the increase in terms of the absolute number of extra workers saying that they are employed through labour hire recruitment in community personal services is bigger than any of the other groups except for
Yeah.
professional sort of.
Yeah.
So it's the
Okay.
professional occupations, at least it has been recently community and personal services, then the sort of clerical admin and some of those labouring type jobs.
Okay. I did ask Paul Bloxham at our SHAPE conference in late August what he felt will happen in terms of the growth of the labour market vacancy rates and opportunities and the economy generally. And he felt that it was at least a year and a half and we won't see an explosion. It's going to be a gradual growth, hopefully not going backwards. On that note though, Mike, for those firms that do want to lean into the growth opportunities, those sectors and industries we've just talked about, quickly, how are you guys working with them? How can you support them to lean into and respond to that growth if we do see a spike in opportunity there?
Yeah, so one of the most powerful tools for a business is in combating rising costs would be having stable, predictable cash flow. And with cash flow, when cash flow is strong, business is a better place to absorb the cost pressures, recruit, retain key staff, and invest in future growth. So ScotPack can assist businesses in proactive steps to stabilise that cash flow. We have various funding solutions to free up working capital, with our largest product being debtor finance, where clients get early access to their outstanding invoices to assist them in paying wages and other costs of sales. One of the latest strings we've added to our bow is a new line of credit, which gives small and medium enterprises the ability to draw funds on demand and only pay for what they use. And another point just on the cash flow, which I'm sure everyone on this call would be aware of, is the federal government's new payday super changes expected to commence early next financial year. Under these new rules, employers have to pay super contributions at the same time as salary and wages instead of quarterly. So this is potentially going to impact recruitment agencies in specific. So they should be looking for some professional advice to sort of manage that cash flow gap as well.
Awesome. Yeah, good advice because it's becoming harder to employ and bigger demand on cash flow, that's for sure. It's interesting, Jeff. One of the things I'm hearing a lot of anecdotally is a lot of firms that, especially with knowledge jobs, looking to, or indeed already offshoring their staffing needs. So, do you guys monitor what the trends are and how many firms are actually offshoring, or is it relatively unknown in the world of labour market data?
I think in Australia, and there may be some source I don't know about, but it's relatively unknown. Like in the US, you can get a variety of sorts of data about the extent of offshoring. In Australia, I'm not aware of sort of the ABS actually directly collecting any data
Mm.
on that. Yeah, it may be that sort of that there are some of the administrative data, that the tax data and that might the tax firm level data might tell you about that. But no, I don't have not aware of data you could use to get a good handle on that in Australia.
Yeah, good one. Look, I'm going to roll into the final question for you. This again looks to how do our members leverage the intelligence for diversification and growth. So the composition of the workforce is, I think what I'm hearing, being fundamentally reshaped by long run trends like technological change. Obviously, the rise of non routine cognitive jobs is a term that I hear in our discussions you using. And I'm doing a lot more analysis of artificial intelligence and what the impact, the disruptive impact will be, not just on us, but more widely. So, in the transition to net zero, delayed retirement, continued growth in female participation, part time, expanding into a little bit more part time participation. How is it that those on this webinar can convert this economic intelligence into tangible, practical growth strategies in your mind?
Well, I mean, yeah, it has to be said that I'm
You're not you're not
not
a
at
you're
all
not a
expert in the
management consultant.
recruiting
I get
business.
it.
So what I'm about to say may be sort of off the wall in that. But I mean, yeah, thinking about that, you putting that question to me, yeah, there was two sorts of ideas I have. One is related to the fact, as you mentioned, Charles, that look, we do know that there are very specific sort of demographic trends occurring, sort of increasing female participation. We expect that still isn't on a par with male participation, so we expect that that's got a bit
Is that
further
right? Still not.
to
Okay.
go. No, still not. And also this thing of delayed retirement, increasing delayed retirement. And so I guess it occurs to me that one role that your members can have is potentially sort of thinking about the types of jobs that employers need to offer to be attractive sort of for the best sort of older workers, the best female workers entering the labor market. So if you know that, look, this is going to be the source of, the source of the addition we get to labor supply, um, females, older workers. Yeah, also we know that there's going to be an increasing proportion of people moving into the labor market who have bachelor's degrees or higher education qualifications. So I guess really sort of being proactive in sort of working with employers to sort of help them create the type of jobs that are going to be attractive to each of those groups, because obviously, the sort of particular features that are going to be attractive to sort of an older worker coming back in the labour market or staying in a job or shifting to a new job are going to be different, say, to female, different to sort of new graduates and that. So I think kind of seeing who the who the additions to the workforce are primarily going to be in terms of demographic characteristics, and thinking about the distinct type of things that those people sort of like about, or each of those groups like about, or value about particular jobs. The other idea is, not unrelated, but yeah, you mentioned technological change, and so think about AI. Um, all of the analysis suggests that, as with previous technological change, AI is unlikely to kind of wipe out, you know, the whole of jobs that people are doing at the moment. Like, so for example, it might in my job as an academic, maybe at some stage AI will take over the teaching part of the job, but there'll still be research sort of, and there'll still be sort of, management activities in that. And so I think what technology demands is that we reorganize jobs. You've got to redesign jobs. Okay, is it okay for me just to do research now? I'm not doing teaching sort of, or is there something else I should be doing sort of as well? You've got to the tasks that we as humans do when AI takes away some of those tasks have to be repackaged into new jobs. And everything suggests when you look at sort of experience of technological change that that's something that sort of employers, can find it, difficult to think through. It takes a lot of experimentation, a lot of, trial and error often to get the right packages. And so it occurs to me as well that sort of important potential role for your members is to be saying, look, in the world of AI, you don't need a person who can do tasks A, B, and C anymore. You need a person who can do tasks B, C, and D. That's now a really good package sort of skills for a worker to have. And we've got those workers. And look, this is why it's going to be valuable for your firm to have B, C, D rather than sort of A, B, C, because you're going to have A being done by AI sort of. So I think technological change causes job redesign. That's something that doesn't, it's not just like, oh, okay, it's obvious what the new job's going to be because we know from history sort of that what happens when technological change occurs is that jobs get redesigned in all different sorts of ways. Some people, if you were doing A and B and A is done by technology, then you just end up doing B and you become more specialized in it and really good at it. But sometimes you stop doing A, then you end up doing B and C sort of, because once you've got A being done by technology, then that allows you to do this extra task C sort of, as well as doing B, which you always did. And so that takes a lot of thinking through sort of, and it takes an assessment of whether workers who are looking for jobs have the skills to do B and C rather than A and B. So it occurs to me that that's something where, your members could be sort of, potentially have a really important role, value added role for employers in kind of doing some of the thinking for them about job
Yeah,
redesign
it's
sort
good
of, and
advice.
selling workers who have those skills.
Yeah. So, look, we had a representative of the Productivity Commission at our parliamentary Canberra summit a couple of weeks ago, and she mentioned that one of the greatest contributors to productivity was not just people moving from one job to another in the same occupation and same industry, but in particular moving from one occupation to another occupational class, and then even better, moving from one industry to another industry. So if we talk about our contribution to productivity, better ways to live, job redesign, you're spot on. But it does require us to get outside of our comfort zone and start thinking about what are the types of things that only we have knowledge of and intelligence and access. So I want to say a massive thank you to Jeff for spending time with us today, talking about how the labour market is changing, how we can look into the future. I know it's not something you naturally get involved in, but your forecasting capability is enormous. And you certainly opened my eyes and hopefully our members' eyes. Mike, thank you so much for joining. Any final words from you in terms of how members can connect and work with Scott Pack?
Yeah, well, look, my details will be on the RCSA website. Feel free to reach out if you want to just have a brief chat around managing your cash flow going forward, whether that's to sort of contract the revenue or to grow your revenue, depending on where you're forecasting your business to go.
Awesome. Well, look, hopefully everyone walks away more intelligent from our labour market intelligence today. And it's going to be an evolving discussion. We might need to get you back on again, maybe in 12 months, Jeff, to continue to monitor it, because I think we're going to go through a pretty dynamic period. Let's hope more people move jobs, because that's good for our members' businesses and it's good for productivity. So thank you for helping us be productive. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks very much, Charles. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.